How you going, guys? Just a quick video at the beach on this beautiful day. About to go do me workout. Drinking water. Got rid of soft drink. Apparently Blair said soft drink makes you a fat cunt. So I stopped drinking soft drink. And also I've got my weight vest, resistance training. I'd advise anyone to do cardio. Do resistance training cardio, because other cardio you just waste your time. I've walked, I've ran. Just waste your time. If you put weights on, if you make it resistance training, you lose a lot more weight. Now the reason I'm exercising, I've lost 13 kilos since prison. I was 124 kilos. Blair and the Vanilla Gorilla called me a fat cunt. So I've had to, get rid of bread, get rid of sugar. I eat a little bit of protein and a spud every night, and some fruit in the morning, and I'm dropping weight like anything. So to anyone out there that think they're a fat cunt too, yeah, just get rid of sugar, get rid of bread, and start working out. So my goal weight would be 95 kilos. So I'm 6'1". I am currently hovering around 111 kilos, 110 kilos right now. So I've got 15 kilos more to go, build a bit of muscle, and I should be looking slim and lean. So yeah, they say when you see images of yourself in a certain angle and you're fat, and you're like, whoa, that will change you to lose weight. What changed me was my stint in prison. When they weighed me when I went into prison, I was like, what the fuck, I'm 124 kilos. So I started stripping weight. Going good. So don't lose faith. I'm 30, I don't even know how old I am. I think I'm 36, 37. There is still time. You can get some juice as well. I don't know, I'm not taking juice yet, but I might at some point, because the testosterone levels have lowered once you get over 30. We'll see what happens, but anyway, that's what I'm doing right now. But I thought I'd do this quick video. I don't want to hammer on about my legal issues, but it's very interesting. I want you guys to understand how the law works and how the state use old laws to take out their political enemies. Now, I spent a month in prison. Saul just got out too, by the way. I did a podcast with him yesterday. He's in a good mood, he's happy, I'll be happy too. He spent 7 months in isolation because the assistant commissioner labels us all as major offenders because we're allegedly neo-Nazis or racists, which means they can basically do anything to you in prison, which they did to me and they did to Saul as well. So I'm happy he's out. Hopefully he gets time served. But with this biased leftist criminal justice system, I don't think he'll get a fair sentence. I think they might even chuck him back in. Who knows? I got sentenced to nearly 3 months, nearly a maximum sentence for disturbing religious worship by what I think is a non-heterosexual magistrate on a gay case for disturbing religious worship. This is insane. That's like the maximum sentence for shoplifting is 5 years. So imagine if you stole a Mars bar and went to jail for 5 years. That's unheard of. That's what happened to me, basically. So I want to talk about this case. I won't make it too boring. I just want to go into certain facts of this case because it's kind of entertaining. I won't get into too much of the corruption of the gay cops, the LGBTI cops, consorting with the witnesses in this case, which was totally insane. I'll get in more my appeal and what I'm appealing about. So I was sentenced first to disturbing a Muslim prayer service. Been charged with disturbing religious worship 3 times now in the last 4 years. They should put my name in the description of the charge. I've been charged more than anyone else for this charge. Insane. It's an old law. It's from like hundreds of years ago, which I'll get into in a second. But I was originally charged for saying Muhammad was a false prophet in a public place at Fed Square, which is used for protesters in Melbourne. It's used for protests every couple of days. There's a protest at Fed Square. And I said Muhammad's a false prophet while a bunch of Muslims were praying. I should be able to say that. Apparently we live in a liberal democracy, but we don't. I tried to use the Charter of Human Rights for religious freedom to say, to say my piece in public. Apparently you can't use that if you offend others. So my comment to everyone out there who still believe we're in a liberal democracy and we have freedom of speech, etc., we don't. Because apparently if you offend someone or insult someone by using your freedom, you renege your freedom. So therefore only popular speech is allowed. But the thing is, the charter was made for non-popular speech in minority groups, such as myself, because I'm a minority now. But that didn't work either. So the whole system's corrupt. We're living under a pretend world, a pretend system where we're pretending that we're a liberal democracy. And as you can see with the lockdowns, we're not. We're very far from a liberal democracy. But anyway, getting back to my charge, my most recent charge, I was sentenced to 10 weeks imprisonment, almost a maximum sentence, for disturbing a religious worship of a gay church. So we'll get into this. This is kind of entertaining. So I was invited into a church. It's not a church. I'm just saying that. That's what the prosecution is saying. It's a church. It was in a hall that was rented by this incorporation called Metropolitan Community Church, which is a fake, fraudulent church that focus on LGBTI Christians or LGBTI gays. They're an oxymoron, but anyway. They have a church. I was invited in. I sat down. It was Mother's Day. There was some random member of the church talking about his mum. I asked for permission to add to this. He said, yeah, sure, you can add to this. I stood up. I asked them if they married sodomites. They said yes. I said, you aren't Christian. This is a fake church, etc. I was removed. I was even punched in the guts by some small Asian dude. Look, I could have bashed everyone in that church, but you got to be careful, man, because with me, the Milo incident with Ricky, we got charged for a fray when we were attacked first. I got charged of 2 times assault with weapon, etc. We were attacked first, but Victoria Police and the system in Victoria, I'm going to get railroaded. So if this little Asian punched me in the stomach and I punched him back, I'll be charged. And so you got to be real careful. It's not about being a pussy. You got to be smart. So anyway, I was punched in the stomach, removed. 2 months later, I was charged after these gay cops like full consorted with the witnesses. But that's a whole other story. So I've been charged of an offence, S21 of the Summary Offences Act, called disturbing religious worship. What is it? This doesn't make any sense. This is fucking old, this charge. It is old. It's from like a time when lawful meant something else, and this is my argument. So I was sentenced to 10 weeks. I've appealed. It's going to the county court. I have to put in a submission, a lawful submission against the law by February, which I have done. I just got to add a few more things to it, etc. But I'll just give you the bare bones of my submission. So in 1901, the Constitution was enacted. And we have a section in the Constitution, the Australian Constitution, called Section 116. Now that states that the government can't establish any religion, churches, and they can't, basically separation of church and state, they can't mingle in church affairs, the state. Now the reason for this section is because prior to 1901, there was the state church. It was the Church of England, and they had a trust with the government. The government would give them money. They were an organised institution of the Commonwealth. And if you went to church, it was a state church, so the state and church would mingle. This has always been like this in England, and it's even like that in Iran and Afghanistan current day, which I'm not against, but you can't have it both ways. If you're going to have a state-sanctioned church, well then you also need to have other churches that aren't state-sanctioned. You can't have it both ways, and this is basically my submission. So this gay church, whose minister is not even a licensed minister by any authority in Australia, which I'll get to in a second. I'll get to it now, actually. So there's only one piece of legislation in Australia that currently exists that actually dictates religion. It dictates religious worship. And it had to fight through the federal court, the high courts, to have that right because of Section 116. And it's the Marriage Act of 1961, I think it's 1961. Where it states that only those who are nominated and approved by a recognised lawful religious denomination in Australia can perform marriage services. This is only related to marriage services. This fake church is not recognised in Australia as a lawful denomination. Who gives out the lawful denominations? It's the Attorney General under the Marriage Act. They make proclamations every few years of this is a lawful recognised religious denomination. They're not. This so-called minister, Susan Townsend, who was a fraud, she can only marry people in a civil union. So a lot of people state that weddings are a part of a religious worship. So let's put it like this. If this so-called church, Metropolitan Community Church, and Susan Townsend was to conduct a wedding service, and I disturbed it, would I be guilty or charged of disturbing religious worship? No, I wouldn't, because it's an unlawful wedding service. She's not allowed to perform weddings as a religious institution, only as a civil celebrant. So here we've got an inconsistency in the law. Some worship is okay, but some isn't. And when something is inconsistent, a state law is inconsistent with the federal law or the Commonwealth law, then the latter shall prevail, which means I should win. Section 109 of the Constitution states that quite clearly. Now this law is insane, totally outdated. It hasn't been amended. And the word lawfully and lawfully assembled for religious worship and lawfully officiating meant something completely different to what it means today, or what people assume it means today. So when they constructed the charge, when they said lawfully assembled for religious worship and lawfully officiating, means that someone was approved and given authority by the government. I'll put it to you like this. If you possessed a firearm, if you didn't have a license for that firearm, you'd be unlawful or in possession of an unlawful firearm. If you're driving a car without a license, you're operating a motor vehicle unlawfully because you don't have a license. It's an authority given by the government. When Section 116 of the Constitution was enacted, the government reneged its right or its authority to give a permit to someone to conduct a religious worship. So therefore, they lost their authority, and therefore it can't be lawful or unlawful. The law is invalid. And this is my basic argument if people don't understand. So here we have an incorporation, Metropolitan Community Church, a gay alleged church, who are having a meeting or a gathering, whatever you want to call it, in a hall that they rent from a legitimate church, an established church, as Magistrate Bolger called it. She called it an established church. They're having an affiliation with an established church. What she didn't want to say was a recognised religious denomination, because that is a legitimate church. So they're renting a hall and they have a meeting. I allegedly disturb it, and all of a sudden disturbing religious worship. Okay, so what is unlawful and lawful when it comes to officiating? If they're going to have it in the charge or assault someone officiating, what would be classed as unlawfully officiating? No such thing, because the government reneged its right or its authority to say what is lawful officiating, unlawfully officiating. See how unfair this charge is? It also says in the charge that the defendant has an obligation. The proof lies on me to prove that my actions were lawful. How could I prove my actions were lawful? Because the original intention of this, in the construction of the charge, which I'll get to in a second, the history of the, because no one knows the construction of the charge. If my defence rests on me proving that it was lawful, how can I prove it's lawful if the government doesn't authorise lawful or unlawful anymore? It takes away my defence. So this charge is inconsistent. They tried to look up the construction of the charge, what all the words mean, or the phrases in the charge, who wrote it, because they usually have a backstory of every word that they put in. And the construction is missing. They don't know the construction. So we have to rest upon the two acts that created the charge. The Places of Worship Act of, I think it's 1800, and the Toleration Act of 1612. And don't be fooled, toleration doesn't mean toleration. They literally say that you have to condemn Catholics to death to become a recognised Church of England or Church of the Commonwealth. Totally insane. So that's my basic argument for that argument, because the cops are saying lawful. The lawful aspect means they're not committing a crime at the time. No, that's not why they wrote that in when they constructed the charge. It had everything to do with the church or the religious institution being an arm of the state. You know, and I'm not against that. I believe we should have a dual government of Christianity and our government. Works well in Afghanistan, modern day Afghanistan, after the Americans left, as Nick Fuentes would say. I would agree, Iran, and will bring morality back to the country. So I'm not against it, but you can't have it both ways. You can't, prosecute a right-winger for disturbing religious worship and also say that you can't make religious worship lawful. I won't get into too much what the magistrate said regarding the Scientology case, because that's in reference to tax cases. I have got a couple of little nuggets in that, which I'll bring up at another time. But the second argument is, and this is a serious argument, this is serious legal issue. Now, when I was taken to court, you give it a brief of evidence. The prosecution had a brief of evidence saying that this church is a legitimate Christian denomination because they follow the Bible, they follow this in their Bibles. Their Bibles were written overseas, they're not even from Australia. Their Bibles say this, and this, and they quote parts of the Bible. That was taken as fact by the magistrate. As a defence, I have an obligation and a right to tear apart the prosecution's argument. So they're saying that they're a Christian denomination because of the Bible, because of this, that. I say they're not a Christian denomination because they marry homosexuals and sodomites and they promote sodomy. And I put religious quotes or Bible quotes about that. The magistrate said to me, that's interpretation and that's my opinion. All right. So if you missed something there, we're having an argument in a court of criminal law in a country where there's a separation of church and state. So the Commonwealth is allowing religious courts. You would see that in Iran or Afghanistan, religious courts. We can't have that here. So in essence, to charge someone with this charge, especially in this circumstance, in the circumstance that I was in at that time, because hey, I have religious rights too. I had the floor at the time. I asked for permission to add to this. I had the floor. Who's to say that my religious worship wasn't disturbed? They disturbed me. It's not their church. The member was talking at the time. I could be considered a member of the group. I was there. I was invited in. So here we are in an Australian jurisdiction court proceeding where we're arguing about who's correct in religion. See the dangerous waters we're going in? Section 116 says that we can't do this shit. We can't have religious courts. So therefore, the charge is invalid. You know, compared to Section 116 of the Constitution. And I'm not one of these constitutional nuts. I'm not talking about common law. I'm talking about straight law. You're going to have a courtroom where both sides are arguing about whose religious argument is correct. It's impossible. You know, you can't do that. But, yeah, so that's where we're at. There was something else I was going to say about that too. But February, it's coming up. If I'm found guilty, I'll try and get another appeal. I'm going to try and take this to the High Court of Australia. I know odds are against me, but I'm not a stupid person. I know what I'm doing, and I'm defending myself. I'm going to talk to Cara. I'm going to try and defend myself in this case. I believe that's the best way to do it. So thanks for all your support out there. Yeah, I thought I'll just give you an update on what I'm doing. I'm just thinking if I left something out. Yeah, I did leave something out. Don't be gay. Alright, love yous all. Catch us.